Brothers and sisters, a warning has been issued that shakes the conscience of the entire Catholic world. A direct warning without the pastoral softening many might expect. It came like a bucket of cold water on the heads of millions who thought they were doing well, who believed their obligations to God were fulfilled, and that old age was a pass for spiritual mediocrity. There is a sin that God does not forgive, not because divine mercy is limited, but because this specific sin closes the only door through which forgiveness could enter. It's not a sin committed in a moment of weakness or youthful outburst. It is a sin built slowly, brick by brick, over years of spiritual complacency. And it targets, with frightening preference, those over 60 with decades of faith behind them. But before we continue, please join our community. Click the subscribe button now and be a part of this purpose with us. And please, leave a comment with your name and the city where you are watching from. At the end of this video, I will say a special prayer for you, your family, and all your needs. Okay, so don't skip any part. Stay with me until the end. The tragedy isn't committed by those who have openly abandoned the faith. It's committed by those who have remained those who went to Mass every Sunday, baptized their children, and have rosaries by their bedside. It's precisely these faithful, with decades of religious practice, who run the most serious risk. Because familiarity with the sacred can silently transform into the greatest enemy of true conversion. There's a huge difference between a believer who walks with God and one who walks ahead of God. Those who walk with God are available to be molded and transformed. Those who walk ahead have already decided their own destiny and how far they are willing to change. This second believer isn't serving God. They're using God's name to legitimize their own spiritual immobility. And this immobility, when the heart hardens to the point of no longer accepting grace, has a name that Christ Himself pronounced with a seriousness that should make us tremble. Stay until the end. What has been revealed about this sin may be the most important warning you will ever hear. Because it's true, and because there's still time. Imagine a man or woman over 60, respectable, known in the parish. They've never committed a great public sin. They've gone to Mass for decades, and they sit on the church pew like someone who has already paid all their spiritual debts, now just waiting for what is due. This person is in grave danger, not despite their history of faith, but because of it. This history has built a wall of presumption, the silent certainty that enough has already been done. They see faith as an employment contract with a retirement clause. But this mentality is not mature faith. It is dead faith disguised as experience. It's the lukewarmness described in the book of Revelation. The sin that God doesn't forgive isn't the sin of the repentant criminal. It is the sin that closes the door from the inside, that looks at divine mercy and says, I don't need that. This sin appears dressed in respectability, with decades of attending Mass and praying rosaries. It appears with the calm voice of someone who says, "My age speaks for itself. May God take me as I am." But faith is not a lifelong title or a spiritual retirement. It is a daily struggle that demands more heroism in old age than in youth. Because in old age, what needs to be bent is not just the knee, but the pride of decades. The first phase is the "I've already done my duty" syndrome. A believer over 60 wakes up, mumbles a prayer while thinking about breakfast, and spends the day complaining. When their conscience warns them about their lack of charity, the answer is rehearsed. My age speaks for itself. I am already like this. This phrase is diabolical. It seems like wisdom, but it's a refusal to be transformed by grace. It's saying to God, "You can stop working on me." The Gospel of Matthew says, "The one who endures to the end will be saved." To persevere means to keep one's heart open for conversion until the last second of life, not until 60, until the end. St. Augustine, on his deathbed, had the penitential psalms on his walls and spent his last days weeping for his own small sins. He knew that before God's purity, no human can ever say, "I am ready." This is the model: humble perseverance until the last breath. This happens because an accumulated spiritual identity can transform from a foundation into a prison. The believer stops seeing themselves as someone on the way and begins to see themselves as someone who has already arrived. And when someone believes they have arrived, they stop walking. There is no true stagnation in the spiritual life, only progress or regression. So ask yourself, when was the last time you allowed God to correct you? When did you change a habit or ask for forgiveness because of your faith? These questions are a diagnosis before the first phase advances to the second. The second phase arises from pain. It's the accumulated weariness of those who have lived, suffered, and lost much. A silent calculation is made. I went to Mass for 40 years, prayed thousands of rosaries, and kept the commandments. And what do I see? Children who have abandoned the faith, loneliness, and prayers that seem to go unheard. Then the thought arrives: God did not fulfill his part. This is the critical point. One path is faith that embraces the cross without understanding. The other is bitterness that settles in, turning prayer into an obligation and faith into an empty routine. Saint Alphonsus Liguori lived his last years with severe arthritis, almost blind, and betrayed. He had every reason to be bitter, but he clung to the crucifix. His lesson: faith is the adherence of the will to God, especially when everything hurts and God's silence seems like abandonment. but is actually intimacy. Your pain, your loneliness, your unanswered prayers are not proof that God has failed. They are the highest invitation God can extend, the invitation to participate in Calvary. Many Catholics have grown up with a flawed contractual theology. I give God my fidelity, and in return, God guarantees me a protected life. This is not Catholicism. God never signed this contract. Christ was clear. In this world, you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. Tribulation is a certainty. It is the field where Christ's victory becomes concrete for those who choose trust over bitterness. So, remove the idea that God owes you anything. Replace the contract with the covenant. A contract can be broken. A covenant is unconditional. The third and final stage is final impenitence. This is the stage that closes the door from the inside. Imagine a drowning person. A lifeline is thrown, landing within reach. But the person looks at the rope and says, "Thank you, but I don't need it. I know how to swim," and they sink. This is the faithful person, over 60, who approaches communion every Sunday without having confessed for years. They create a theology of convenience where their sins aren't real sins because God understands. The empty confessionals are not a sign of a holy generation, but of a generation that has lost the notion of sin. This spiritual blindness is the most concrete manifestation of the sin against the Holy Spirit. It is the state of one who has so completely closed their heart to grace that even God's mercy finds no opening. God is eager to forgive, always throwing the rope. But the unrepentant believer has refused it so many times they can no longer even see it. Saint John Vianney spent 18 hours a day in the confessional. He wept not for the great public sinners, but for the respectable, lifelong churchgoers who had become so hardened by complacency that they no longer saw their need for God's mercy. They had become blind to their own sin. Please, let this not be your story. Yes. Never too late to open your heart again. The lifeline is always there. God's mercy is an ocean waiting for you. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe.